Penn State football not satisfied with having a lot of commitments in admittedly an odd part of the recruiting calendar as we sit here at the end of the summer. But they have begun their work on 2026 in earnest. The latest Nittany Lion joining the program, a part of the future class. So Sean Fitz, publisher for Blue White Illustrated, here to discuss the next Nittany Lion. And Fitz, how you doing today? And what are we talking about? Who are we talking about on this latest edition of Breaking News?
I'm doing fantastic, man. It's a lot easier to talk about guys when they're committing, and as opposed to just sort of kicking the can down the road until they commit. So Penn State on the board again in the class of 2026. It's been a big week for the Nittany Lions. Started, of course, with Jasir Rogers from Delaware on Saturday. Added Kevin Brown, a massive commit from Harrisburg, and now they go to the defensive side of the ball. Princeton, West Virginia, senior high school defensive end Daniel Jennings. Jennings played his junior season across the border at Graham High School in Virginia, but he has transferred back to Princeton for his senior year, number one prospect in West Virginia, and the first defensive prospect in the class for Penn State. Going to play defensive end, a little on the shorter side, listed at 6'2", just a little bit below that, 225 right now. A little different body style than maybe we're used to, but he came to camp twice this summer, earned, re-solidified that offer this latest trip, and working with Deion Barnes. So Penn State 5 commits now in the class of 2026. They're rolling, man.
Yeah. So this is another early commitment in this class, as you just mentioned. So with these situations, we don't have the conversation, this long, extensive recruiting history, I'm assuming. So I guess what was the last couple of months like, to your understanding, to get them across the line at this point with Daniel Jennings?
Well, he came up to campus for a spring practice in March, came back for the blue-white game. That's the thing. He knocked out two of the stalwarts here for Penn State recruiting. He came to the blue-white game in April, came to the Lash Bash over the weekend, also came to camp in June. So he made his interest pretty well known. This is a kid, if you own a map, I mean, this is a kid from the bottom of West Virginia, right there in the Bluefield area, just basically due west of Blacksburg, Virginia. So like, he's down there. He's way down there. So this isn't a kid coming up from Martinsburg or somebody coming over from the western part of West Virginia where it's not a big trip. I mean, that's some time invested into that. So that showed his interest level. It came down to Penn State and West Virginia. Still figuring out whether I should call him an in-state kid for West Virginia or not. Again, he played last year across the border at Graham High School in Virginia, was an all-state performer in the state of Virginia, one of 4 sophomores to earn a spot on that 2A team and the all-state team, which is pretty impressive. He showed that he wanted to be at Penn State. His latest trip, I think, sealed the deal. And then all of a sudden he comes away, and now he's a member of Penn State's budding class of 2026. So I think it's a good start. It's a guy that we have, I think, a lot of different eyes on. You and I have each taken a look at the film. We've seen him in camp. He worked out at linebacker. He worked out at defensive end. We're going to slot him as an edge prospect. 6'2", 225. So, kind of on that borderline in terms of maybe could play linebacker if they needed him to, but I think everybody's looking at him as defensive end right now.
Yeah, and it's so early in the process, right? He's not a 10th grader because he's going to be a junior here in just a few days. So there is kind of it is early in this particular process, but in the development process, everyone kind of goes at their own rate. It's a very interesting, as you mentioned, not the same type of body type that they've recruited recently, because you can look at the class of 2025 and there's a ton of these guys. Is he a linebacker? Is he defensive end? One of those guys even moved up in Max Granville to the class of 2024. He's 6'3". You look at Deshaun Burnett, 6'3". Some guys that have maybe big linebacker bodies that also can play defensive end eventually, but when you look at Jennings, he's built more from a size perspective like a linebacker, except he's got the length to play defensive end, and he's got the tools to play defensive end from a skill set. So at this point, it kind of feels like he could play either position, and it's a Schrodinger's defender at this point. When you open up the box at the end, we'll know, but I don't know that it's really clear right now exactly what he will be at the next level. What's your, I guess, opinion on a player like that in the class of 2026? And kind of, I don't want to say taking a gamble, but at the same time, like a guy who has that versatility. Is that a positive, or is that something that you're looking at and going, okay, this has to work itself out before we get to the end of this story?
Number one, you look at it and you say, can he play? Yes. Number one, he can play. Number two, it's kind of like that Keon Wiley discussion that we had a couple of years ago. It's like this is a guy
Yeah.
whose highlights you look at and you see him playing stand-up defensive end. I guess you could, I don't know how to label it because I'm not really familiar with their defense. Looks like a 3-4 that he comes off the edge, and that's basically his job is to create havoc off the edge, and he does a really good job of it. I think he's got room to put some more weight on. Like I said, 6'1.5", 6'2", 225. So like he's got length to work. It's interesting that they had him on campus this weekend working out. They also had Jackson Ford from Malvern Prep working out. Jackson Ford a couple inches taller than him, but very similar prospects, if that makes sense, despite the 2-inch difference. Very similar athletes. So it'd be interesting to see how this defensive end thing plays out. But you've got versatility here. You've got the ability, does lose weight, gets down to 210. Maybe you do play him at linebacker, but I think
Yeah.
Penn State looks at him. They see a guy that can bend well, which is really one of their edge,
Yep.
like marking posts here. Like this is interesting to watch, going from John Scott to Deion Barnes. And I know that Deion learned under John for a couple of years, but Penn State really wanted to go basically 6'4" and up, like get those guys that eventually transition to NFL type prospects. And, sometimes those guys pan out. More often than not, you're playing with fire with a guy that's got some length and is going to take some time to develop. Now, when they hit big. Absolutely.
Yep.
But at the same time, it's been an interesting transition. I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background. But it's been an interesting transition with guys like AK, guys like Chop Robinson, smaller guys that have come in, and I say smaller with some hand quotes there, but shorter that have come in, and they've just wreaked havoc there. So it's been an interesting watch over the last couple of years where Penn State sort of got away from, well, if he's not 6'4" or 6'5", maybe he's down the board a little bit. So you've got guys like that. Mason Robinson kind of fits that profile as well. Max Granville, who just arrived on campus this week, fits that profile as well. Cortez Harris is in there. So Penn State not afraid to take shorter guys now.
Yeah.
That you got to be an athlete. The length has to match up because the length does
Yes.
matter. And you've just got those little boxes that you can fill. And I kind of have a theory working in my head that those shorter guys are ready to play earlier, and they're ready to
Pad level, baby.
It's pad level, but it's also like, as a taller guy here, it's like a baby giraffe walking along. You gotta, get those feet in front of you and sort of grow at that rate. And again, those taller guys, if they absolutely hit, like you take a guy like Joseph Mupoi, and this is just a hypothetical here, but a guy like him, if he maxes out everything that he can possibly be, he can be a first round pick. But at the same time, he's got a longer way to go than these shorter guys. And these shorter guys can, contribute a little bit earlier on the football field and eventually be very productive guys. So gotten away from that sort of pigeonholing yourself into taking the bigger guys, taking the longer, the definite long NFL type. Like they've gotten away from taking the guys that you project 2 years out in a mock draft. And they've gotten guys that, eventually work their way up the mock draft just by being productive.
I like it's funny because you were mentioning all these players, and I'm like, yeah, Malachi Williams, though, he's a big body DN, and I remembered he's like 6'3".
He's like 6'3",
he's the tall one of the group, and he's 6'3". But
Jalen Harvey's 6'2" and 265. I mean, the different body types, and it's just about finding the bend. It's about finding the athletic guy on the edge and the guy that's got that burst. And again, they don't all have to be 6'6". And I think Penn State took some guys earlier in this decade even that just didn't have not panned out like that. So be a little bit more flexible. It's going to work out for everybody.
Yeah, and I think to the point, bringing it back to Daniel Jennings here, he's a player that has the speed too, where he is not just a guy who is, got good bend and he's got good burst. He can run, so there's a lot of different aspects to his game. You watch his highlights there as a running back. You watch the way he is able to chase from the backside. The versatility here, I'm not saying he's got all of the elite traits of a linebacker, but he does have some versatility to his game, and that is something that they've been doing too, beyond just the length and the burst and the bend. Zone dropping is a big part in college football now, and you got to have guys that are athletic enough to play in space on maybe it's 5 critical plays, but you want to have the ability to do that, and they've had that flexibility within their defense from Abdul Carter, Chop Robinson, even Adisa Isaac, who's classically framed as a D end, but could drop into coverage. So another guy who has some of those skill sets, some of those traits in Daniel Jennings. But as we said, it's pretty far out in his development curve. We'll see what he becomes by the end of this. So as we're looking forward, what do you want to highlight here at the end as we wrap up Daniel Jennings and we kind of broaden the scope to a larger conversation about Penn State recruiting?
Well, I think if you look at the general conversation with Daniel Jennings, and this is just me forecasting this because we're doing this video in advance, but we've got him as an 89 3-star, but we haven't ranked a ton of guys at on three so far. So that 89 3-star is the number 183 overall player in our rankings. The industry rankings have him at 236 as a 4-star prospect, number 23 edge. And I think the edges, again, come in all shapes and sizes. What's interesting to me here is you look at the options that Deion Barnes is going to have at the next level, and you think that, or excuse me, in the next cycle, and you think it's going to be, pretty fruitful for him, and he's going to have a little bit of pick. So you're wondering why take Daniel Jennings now? Well, I don't think they take him unless they see him in camp. Twice now this summer. So working with him, I'm going back to the in-person evaluation. I'm going to stump for it. Like, those guys know what they're looking for, not only for, talent and athleticism, but also fit in their program, fit in their scheme. And I think that Deion was able to identify this and go with this early. Like, I think that, in past years, maybe this is a guy they kick the can down the road. And, I think so scholarship limits are expanding. Things are working their way in that direction. So there's room to take guys. And then at the end of the day, and I know nobody wants to say it, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, guys won't end up in the class if they're not up to snuff. We saw it last year, like Amari, you asked me about Amari Gaines before we went on the show. And I don't think this is a situation like that at all, but like, you can find yourself in the right direction there. And I think it's cold hearted. Nobody wants to say it, but like, that's a situation that you will see play out in 2026 all over the place. And, I think it'll be a really interesting subplot to that whole class as we try and figure out the best practices for 105 scholarship roster or 110 scholarship or roster limit or whatever, whichever they go. But you look at Jennings, he's got some bend, he's got some burst, he can come off the edge, he's a versatile player. Again, I threw that Keon Wiley comparison out there just because Keon was just such a good player. Like, and unfortunately, they're not going to have him for at least much of the 2024 season at Penn State. But like, he was a guy that was on a team with a borderline 5-star prospect and an eye white, but he was the guy, he was the player. And you look at the comparisons that we did earlier about a guy that maybe takes a little bit longer to get into his college career and reach his potential. Well, there's a story for you right there. And that Keon Wiley was the better player then. And unfortunately, with that injury, we're not going to be able to say it, but like, he was pretty close to where an eye white is right now at Texas A&M. So I think that's an interesting way to look at it, and to continue to track this progress. I think the numbers will be a little bit bigger, and Deion, as he continues to get more comfortable, as he continues to get more street cred, I guess you could say, he's going to continue to take his guys, and this seems like one of his guys.
And we'll have plenty of time to talk about him in the class of 2026, which is already 5 players deep, and we're not even the national signing day for 2025. So plenty of road ahead of us when it comes to this class, and with Daniel Jennings and his recruiting journey. We will be with you every step of the way. Subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. 2 months for $1 gets you access to all of that content. 2 months for $1 with code PSU1 at sign up, and you'll get access to that information heading into the college football season, and of course into the recruiting season that goes along with college football season. Who's coming to the games, who's the names you need to know, who's getting dapped up by James Franklin before the game. Our guys have all that information. Ryan Snyder is a recruiting bloodhound. He's out there. He knows all the names. He's getting all the photos before the game. He's coming and he's getting them to you. Fitz does a great job with all that stuff as well, getting you that information on the context side to make sure that you know more than all of your friends when it comes to Penn State football. We'll be back with the next recruiting breaking news here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel.